Even with just over 3 hours of runtime, Marvel Studios still couldn't pack everything they wanted into Avengers Endgame. It's almost like they were trying to wrap up over a decade of filmmaking, storytelling, world building, and character development or something. Although we got to see some movie moments we'd waited years for, there was a surprising amount which got left on the cutting room floor. From a cameo from Katherine Langford to old enemies being reunited, we'll talk about some of the craziest things you won't believe didn't make it into Endgame. Captain America. Let's be honest, for all the predictions we made in the lead up to Endgame, there was one moment that truly managed to stun even the fine folks at CBR, and it happened right in the beginning of the movie. Yeah, we're talking about Thor taking Thanos' head off, and not because we doubted the God of Thunder or his incredible weapon. Nope, we're talking about the fact that this happened in a Disney movie, where this kind of thing just doesn't happen. So it's even more surprising that there was almost another moment in which a character found themselves losing their head quite literally. When Thanos arrived at the Avengers compound, he was going to bring with him the head of Captain America. Yikes! And to make this even crazier, this idea lasted through many script revisions until the Russo brothers finally decided that it wouldn't work. Instead, Steve Rogers got a happy ending, and instead of concentrating on his head, we all got to concentrate on another part of our beloved Captain America. Red Skull. Even though we've seen Endgame a frankly embarrassing amount of times at this point, we still have some unanswered questions. Like what happened when Steve Rogers went back to Vormir to drop off the Soul Stone with the Red Skull? We still can't believe we missed out on that awkward encounter. But originally, the plan was to have Steve Rogers encounter his old nemesis much sooner. He was going to travel to Vormir instead of Clint Barton and Natasha Romanoff, and would have to work together with the Red Skull in order to obtain the stone. But if that sounds crazy unrealistic to you, then you're not alone. The idea was scrapped pretty early on in the writing process, and instead we never even got to see the interaction between Steve and the Red Skull. But if it makes you feel any better, Joe Russo claims that the Red Skull's new spooky situation has been so transformative that it's unlikely he and Cap had a very interesting confrontation anyway. It definitely doesn't make us feel any better, because our thirst for seeing Captain America punch bad guys simply cannot be satiated. New Asgard. Science versus magic in the MCU has always been kind of tricky. Before the debut of Doctor Strange and the Mystic Arts, the MCU definitely tried to err on the side of science having an explanation for everything, even if that did involve a lot of hand-waving and irresponsible use of the word quantum. Endgame almost had a plotline involving the merging of science and supernatural by having Thor and Iron Man team up. When the heroes divide into their time travel teams, one of the initial pairings was going to be the God of Thunder and Tony Stark. The two of them would travel back to Asgard, where Tony would undoubtedly have some interesting reactions to what he sees. If you think about it, this strategy does make sense, because at the time, the Reality Stone and the Space Stone were tucked away in Odin's vault. Seriously, wouldn't that have been easier than trying to get the Space Stone away from the Battle of New York? After all, Rocket seemed to have an easy enough time liberating the Reality Stone all by himself when Thor went off course in the movie. Plus, Tony was going to sneak around Asgard in a stealth suit and get into a fight with Heimdall. Apparently, Tony's tech is no match for Heimdall's Omnisense. We'll add that to the list of exciting MCU fights that we never got to see. All grown up. If you ignored Tony's prophetic pregnancy dream from Infinity War, and Gwyneth Paltrow totally spoiling her existence during an interview, then maybe you were surprised by the appearance of Morgan Stark in Endgame. But we were more surprised by someone we didn't see, and that's 13 Reasons Why actress Katherine Langford. In the lead up to the movie's release, her name was listed on the movie's IMDb page in an undisclosed role, and Langford herself seemed to be fueling this rumor with vague Avengers social media posts. But many fans left the theater wondering how they had missed Langford's appearance. If you were one of those fans, rest assured you're not losing it, because Langford ended up not making it into the theatrical release. She was originally going to play a grown-up version of Morgan Stark who would appear to Tony in a vision of the future. This one would occur at a metaphysical way station, just after defeating Thanos and just before whatever happens to people in the MCU when they perish. But in the end, the scene was deemed too complex of an idea, and ended up getting scrapped entirely. Living Tribunal. Screenwriters Christopher Marcus and Stephen McFeely claim Marvel Studios head Kevin Feige brought them some comic book panels to serve as inspiration for the movie. Some of them involved a character comic book fans know as the Living Tribunal, who is tasked with safeguarding the multiverse. Doctor Strange was going to face off against the Mad Titan and basically punch him out of his body, similarly to how the Ancient One greeted Doctor Strange all those years ago. There would be a review of all Thanos' misdeeds, and the Living Tribunal would ultimately and obviously find him guilty. But introducing the Living Tribunal would have been opening up a whole box of multiverses that Endgame didn't need. It was deemed too out there to include in the movie, and would have been a detraction from the movie's fast and action-packed pace. Tony Stark. Everyone knows that Tony Stark just had to out-hero everyone during Avengers Endgame by making the ultimate sacrifice to defeat Thanos and save the day. And unlike Natasha, he did so with tons of witnesses and a catchy last quote. Wow, it's like she didn't even want a memorial service for sacrificing herself for the greater good. Not that she got one anyway, but we digress. After Tony Stark made his last attention-grabbing move, there was a brief time jump during which we saw his memorial service. But originally, we were going to see more of the immediate aftermath of his sacrifice, and not just Peter Parker breaking our hearts. This scene was filmed prior to his funeral scene, and involved heroes including the Black Panther, Captain Marvel, Hawkeye, Star-Lord, and Ant-Man mourning his loss. But the Russo brothers decided Tony's memorial service had a much greater impact than this battlefield farewell, and it was cut from the final version of the movie. That's right, Natasha's sacrifice was just glossed over while Iron Man nearly got 2 touching farewell scenes. Final fight. Although Infinity War decimated the MCU lineup, the cataclysmic event from the film was reversed during a pivotal moment of Endgame. What we ended up seeing was all of our formerly dusted heroes join in the battle against Thanos in a blaze of glory, but the scene almost ended up being much more awkward. Everyone showed up ready to fight in the movie, but the initial idea was to have a few minutes of everyone figuring out what's going on. If you think about it, everyone did jump into action pretty fast during Endgame without much setup. But according to writers Christopher Marcus and Stephen McFeely, the scene with all the characters getting their bearings came across as way too unnatural. If you drop over a dozen people, most of whom are complete strangers to one another, into a situation, it's going to be chaotic. There would be people talking over each other or potentially fighting against one another. Having everyone speak lines of dialogue one at a time during this scene would be the only way to have it not be a total nightmare, but in a world of superheroes and magic rocks, this was ultimately deemed too unrealistic. Worthy. Captain America wielding Mjolnir was something we had been waiting to see on the big screen for so long, but that epic scene was almost quite different. Instead of effortlessly throwing around the legendary hammer, we almost saw Steve Rogers struggling with self-doubt concerning his worthiness first. In Avengers Age of Ultron, he seemed unable to wield Thor's hammer Mjolnir like the rest of the Avengers. Although it did make it all the more incredible when Cap finally picked up Mjolnir in Endgame. In fact, the Russo brothers clarified that Steve Rogers was always capable of using the mighty Uru weapon, he just didn't want to show off before. If it was anyone else other than Captain America himself, that would seem like a really lame excuse. Although we don't know for sure why this moment of self-doubt wasn't included, it's probably because he figured all this out already during Age of Ultron. Aerial battle. Saying that there was a lot going on during the final battle of Avengers Endgame is kind of the understatement of the century. But there was so much more to the final Endgame battle which we never got to see, and it wasn't all just small details. In fact, there was originally going to be an entire aerial action sequence according to Sean Gunn. He revealed there was going to be a lot more in-the-air action than we got to see in the final version of the movie. And it does make sense considering all of the characters who have the ability to fly either due to their own abilities or the technology at their disposal. Not to mention all the Chitauri gliders, Ravager spaceships, and more we saw zooming around after the Avengers compound was destroyed. Last words. If you're a fan of CBR and the MCU, then you probably know this fun fact about the infamous I Am Iron Man from the 2008 movie. It wasn't in the script, but was something Robert Downey Jr. ad-libbed, and it went over so well that they decided to keep it in the movie. Not only was it an amazing cinematic moment, but Iron Man going public definitely changed the shape of the MCU. So it's pretty ironic that Robert Downey Jr. didn't want to say the line he came up with during Avengers Endgame. At first, Tony wasn't going to say anything at all when he defeated Thanos for good. Hey, sometimes actions really do speak louder than words. But when Tony's last words were changed to I am Iron Man, RDJ thought it would be sad and emotional and was reluctant to say the line. Well, he was right that the line made the movie much more tragic, but it also made it much better than if Tony hadn't said anything at all. Frankly, we can't stop being horrified yet intrigued by all the different ways Captain America's story nearly went from his encounter with the Red Skull to his, untimely end. Which of these almost movie moments was your favorite? And do you think any of them should have been included in the final cut? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section below, and then click subscribe for more from CBR.